Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Dave from the Camera Store. Today we're talking about DSLR cameras from Canon. Today in the market we are inundated with a ton of great mirrorless camera options, but I want to know, are DSLRs even relevant anymore? Now, it's a bit of a nostalgia trip for me. When I first got into photography, it was because my dad had a Canon AE1. And then I remember a friend of mine picked up a Canon EOS 1 and I was so envious of him. So I'm choosing Canon today as a brand to go through. And they've got a bunch of different models that are still current, even though the mirrorless revolution is sort of taking over. Of the cameras we're talking about today, 2 of them are reviewed before my time here as a TCS TV host. So you're going to see some familiar faces here. When you first decide to buy a camera, you're all over the place when it comes to questions. Now, I always like starting at the entry point in a camera's lineup, and that sort of gives me a baseline to build upon with my other models. Now, in Canon's case, it's the Rebel SL3. It's a 24 megapixel crop sensor camera that gives you a really nice shooting experience. Even from the menu system alone, you can tell that it's meant for first-time users. It's very intuitive and it's really encouraging you and helping you learn about the basics in photography. Where you're going to find entry-level DSLR cameras a bit frustrating is as you grow and want to start shooting more aggressive subjects, things like birds in flight or any kind of sports. The frames per second are typically fairly low. In the Canon SL3 case, it's 5 frames per second, which sounds fast, but in the real world when it comes to shooting sports, we want to go much faster than that. And that's where he takes us to this next level of camera. And in Canon's case, that's the 90D. So our second stop on our Canon tour today is the Canon 90D. Now typically when you move into a manufacturer's mid-range DSLR camera, you get things like better build quality. In the Canon 90D case, you go from a composite body in the SL3 to an aluminum frame. So a little more robust, it is a weather sealed camera, but more importantly, you get performance features like 11 frames per second to work with. That's great for shooting sports in action, but I also get a 30 megapixel sensor, which is higher resolution and better dynamic range and basically overall better image quality. We also have a nicer viewfinder to work with and a much bigger battery, which is going to be a huge factor if you're out on a longer day shooting. For me, I find that the 90D is a really nice sweet spot in the Canon lineup. Its fit and finish and its functionality gives you a lot of flexibility, much more so than the SL3 when it comes to a variety of shooting situations. The next camera we're going to talk about is the Canon 6D Mark II, and now it's an interesting fit in the Canon lineup, much like Drew's framing of this shot. When you look at the specs compared to this versus the 90D, you're like, well, what's the big difference? The 90D has faster frames per second. The 90D has higher resolution. If you open up the 6D and take a look at the sensor, it's the exact same size as a 35mm negative or slide. Larger sensors typically give us much better low light performance. They also give us a little shallower depth of field and a nicer aesthetic. Although the 6D can't compete with the 90D as far as resolution or frames per second, it outperforms the 90D as far as image quality goes. So for me, to upgrade from the 90D into the 6D Mark II tells me that my style of photography is going to be more less aggressive autofocus subjects. I'm going to be more people. I'm going to be more landscape, things where frames per second don't matter quite as much. It's kind of where most people are aiming to try and get into, and there's a reason why the full frame cameras are so popular with working pros. The last camera we're going to talk about today is the Canon 5D Mark IV, which I'm holding here. Now this is a step up from the Canon 6D Mark II in a bunch of different ways. It features a 30 megapixel full frame sensor, a nicer viewfinder, and a better weather sealed body. And it's basically been the workhorse camera of working pros and high-end enthusiasts for a long, long time. In fact, I'm still shooting with a 5D Mark III. It's never let me down. Now, when you look at this lineup of cameras from Canon, it's obvious that in a world filled with all kinds of new, latest and greatest mirrorless cameras, there still is a big market segment dedicated to shooting with DSLR cameras. People who love looking through an optical viewfinder, and they like that experience more so than shooting with a mirrorless camera. We also have a legacy of used lenses on the market that we can draw from at a much better price point than the latest and greatest from the mirrorless side of things. I, of course, want to know what you guys think of this topic. Are DSLRs even relevant anymore? Are they of any interest to you? Or do you think the manufacturers just drop them completely and concentrate solely on the latest and greatest tech? Now make sure you leave comments down below. Let me know what you think. Follow us both on Instagram and please subscribe. Hit the notification bell. We'll catch you again next time. Hey, thanks for sticking around. If you want to check out our most recent episodes, click up here. And if you're Canadian and want to shop local, click down here.